The late afternoon sun cast long, deceptive shadows across the pristine lawns of Willow Creek Estates, painting a picture of suburban tranquility that Sarah knew, from bitter experience, was nothing more than a carefully curated illusion. For 3 weeks, she tried to blend in, to observe, to understand the intricate, often absurd, dynamics of this upscale community. Her sleek, obsidian black electric sedan, a prototype from her company's newest line, hummed faintly as it cooled in her driveway, perfectly angled, tires precisely within the paved boundaries. Yet, here stood Brenda Sterling, HOA president, self-appointed arbiter of all things proper and picturesque, her face a mask of pinched fury, vibrating with an intensity usually reserved for global crisis. "I'm telling you for the last time, Miss Hayes." Brenda's voice, sharp as a freshly sharpened pencil, cut through the quiet. "That vehicle is a blight on this community. It's not only a gross violation of our aesthetic guidelines, the color, for heaven's sake, but it's encroaching on the communal space. Our bylaws are very clear on this." Sarah, leaning casually against the polished fender, crossed her arms. Her expression was calm, almost annoyingly so, a stark contrast to Brenda's theatrical outrage. "Brenda, we've been over this. My car is parked entirely on my property. It's not blocking any communal path, fire lane, or view. And aesthetic guidelines do not dictate approved car colors. I've read the bylaws meticulously." Brenda's perfectly coiffed blonde bob seemed to stiffen. "Don't you dare tell me about the bylaws. I practically wrote them. This isn't some backwater apartment complex, Ms. Hayes. This is Willow Creek. We maintain standards. High standards. That thing you drive looks like something out of a science fiction movie, and it's disrupting the harmonious visual flow of the streetscape." She gestured wildly towards the street, as if the car were a radioactive anomaly radiating bad vibes. Sarah suppressed a sigh. This was exactly the kind of petty tyranny she'd come here to investigate. She was, officially, Sarah Hayes, a new resident. Unofficially, she was the recently appointed CEO of Sterling Property Management, the conglomerate that owned Willow Creek Estates and a host of other HOAs across the state. Her undercover assignment was to understand why so many residents felt utterly stifled by their HOA boards, and Brenda Sterling, with her iron fist and inflated sense of authority, was providing a master class in the problem. The car, an experimental company vehicle, was indeed a striking design, but it was also a perfectly legal, emissions-free marvel. "Brenda, with all due respect," Sarah began, her voice carefully modulated, "your interpretation of disrupting harmonious visual flow is subjective and not codified in any rule. My car is legally registered, insured, and parked. There is no violation." "Oh, you think so, do you?" Brenda's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint in them. She pulled out her phone, already dialing. "We'll see what the authorities have to say about your defiance. This is a private community. We have rules. And if you won't comply, the police will ensure you do. I'm calling them right now. I'll tell them you're refusing to move an illegally parked vehicle and are obstructing an HOA officer." Sarah watched, a faint smirk playing on her lips, as Brenda dramatically explained the grievous offense to the 911 dispatcher, exaggerating every detail with gusto. She even claimed Sarah was being verbally aggressive, a claim so ludicrous it almost made Sarah laugh aloud. Within minutes, the distant wail Brenda had conjured became a close reality. A patrol car, its lights flashing silently, glided to a stop in front of Sarah's house. 2 officers emerged, their expressions neutral, but with the weary professionalism of those who've seen it all, especially in affluent neighborhoods. Brenda straightened, her demeanor instantly shifting from irate resident to dignified authority figure. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. This woman, Ms. Hayes, is refusing to comply with our community's clearly established parking regulations. She has an unauthorized, oversized, and frankly, unsightly vehicle obstructing the common aesthetic, and despite my repeated requests as HOA president, she refuses to move it. Brenda pointed an accusatory finger at Sarah's car, then at Sarah herself. She even threatened me. Officer Miller, the taller of the two, approached Sarah first. "Ma'am, could you explain your side of the situation?" His tone was calm, disarming. "Certainly, officer," Sarah said, her voice even. "My name is Sarah Hayes. This is my property, and this is my vehicle, a 2025 Sterling Industries Model X. It is parked entirely within my driveway, not obstructing any public or communal right-of-way. As for the unauthorized and unsightly claims, the HOA bylaws do not govern vehicle aesthetics beyond basic." The silence that followed Officer Miller's revelation was so profound, Sarah could almost hear Brenda's carefully constructed world splintering. Brenda Sterling, the formidable HOA president, stood rooted to her impeccably manicured lawn, her face a ghastly shade of white. Her eyes, usually so sharp and imperious, darted frantically between Sarah, the Sterling Industries car, and the two police officers, as if searching for a hidden camera, a punchline to a cruel joke. "Sterling Property Management?" Brenda finally managed to croak, her voice barely a whisper, completely devoid of its usual brassy confidence. "You're the CO?" The word seemed to physically hurt her, each syllable a shard of her shattered authority. Sarah offered a small, polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's correct, Brenda. Sarah Hayes, at your service. Or rather, at the service of all the residents whose experiences with our HOAs I'm here to personally understand and, if necessary, rectify." Her gaze held Brenda's, unwavering, and in that moment, Brenda saw not just a new neighbor, but the architect of her potential downfall. Officer Miller, sensing the shift in dynamics, cleared his throat. "Miss Sterling, I believe our presence here is no longer required. There's clearly no violation. We'll be on our way." He nodded briefly to Sarah, a silent acknowledgement of her true standing, then turned to his partner. "Davies, let's go!" Officer Davies, who had been observing the entire scene with a detached amusement, simply gave a slight shrug to Brenda, a gesture that perfectly conveyed the absurdity of her previous claims, and then followed Miller back to the patrol car. The cruiser's tires crunched softly on the gravel as it pulled away, leaving Brenda and Sarah alone in the oppressive twilight. Brenda looked utterly lost, her hands trembling slightly as they dropped from her sides. The vibrant life seemed to have drained from her, leaving a hollowed-out shell. But why?" she stammered, the question a raw plea. "Why are you undercover?" "Because, Brenda," Sarah explained, her voice losing its earlier politeness, a steelier tone emerging. "We've received an unprecedented number of complaints from Willow Creek. Petitions about arbitrary rule enforcement, excessive fines, and a general feeling of being bullied by the board. Your name, in particular, came up repeatedly. I needed to see it for myself firsthand. And I have." Brenda recoiled as if struck. "Complaints? Bullying? That's preposterous. I'm simply enforcing the rules, maintaining standards. Without me, this community would devolve into chaos." Her voice was gaining a fragile strength, a desperate attempt to cling to her rapidly dissolving authority. "Is that so?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Because what I've observed over the last 3 weeks, and certainly in the last 20 minutes, is a pattern of harassment, personal vendettas disguised as rule enforcement, and a blatant disregard for due process. My ghastly experimental vehicle that disrupts the harmonious visual flow is the latest example. It's a company vehicle, Brenda. Sterling Industries. You just tried to have the CO of your parent company's car impounded for being the wrong color." The irony was not lost on Brenda, whose face flushed anew. She opened her mouth, then closed it, unable to form a coherent defense. Her gaze fell to the ground, shoulders slumping. The air around her, once crackling with righteous indignation, was now thick with shame and a burgeoning fear. I didn't know," Brenda mumbled, her eyes still downcast. "How was I supposed to know? You presented yourself as Sarah Hayes, a new resident." "And that's exactly what I am," Sarah countered, taking a step closer. "A resident with rights just like everyone else here. My title doesn't negate that, but it does mean I have a unique perspective on the operational integrity of Sterling property management. And frankly, Brenda, your operation here is failing on multiple fronts." Brenda finally looked up, her eyes wide, a flicker of panic replacing the earlier disbelief. What does that mean? What are you going to do?" Sarah paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. The sun had dipped lower, casting long, eerie shadows across Brenda's trembling form. "It means, Brenda, that the current leadership of the Willow Creek Estates HOA is under immediate review. Effective immediately, all enforcement actions initiated by you are suspended until a full audit of your tenure can be completed. This includes any outstanding fines, new bylaws you push through, and any ongoing disputes you're managing." Brenda gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Suspended? You can't. I'm the president. I was elected." "You were elected to serve the community, Brenda," Sarah said, her voice now flat, devoid of emotion. "Not to terrorize it. And while elections grant authority, they do not grant impunity, especially when that author it." The gravity of Mr. Henderson's story settled heavily on Sarah, eclipsing the lingering taste of Brenda's earlier theatrical outrage. This wasn't just a power struggle, it was a systematic abuse, leaving genuine casualties in its wake. She looked down at the meticulously kept documents, the fine print of the arbitrary fines, the pleas for leniency ignored. "Thank you for trusting me with this, Mr. Henderson," Sarah said, her voice softer now, laced with genuine empathy. "I promise you, we will look into every single one of these. You won't lose your home over your roses." Mr. Henderson, his shoulders still hunched, managed a small, hopeful nod. "Thank you, Miss Hayes. Truly, I don't know what else to do." With a fragile dignity, he rose and left, leaving Sarah with a renewed resolve that hardened into unyielding determination. Meanwhile, Brenda Sterling, stewing in her opulent home, had done little more than pace from window to window, occasionally peering through the blinds as if expecting Sarah's black car to reappear and deliver another blow. Carol's lukewarm response had only fueled her paranoia. She needed allies, people who would stand by her, who owed her. Her mind immediately went to the other board members. David Chun, the treasurer, usually preoccupied with his golf game, and Martha Jenkins, the secretary, whose primary motivation seemed to be the complimentary coffee at board meetings. Neither was a pillar of conviction, but they were votes. She picked up the phone again, her fingers still shaking, and called David. "David, it's Brenda. We have a crisis." Her voice, though still tinged with panic, now held a desperate attempt at authority. "That new woman, Hayes, she's not who she says she is. She's from Sterling, and she's trying to stage a hostile takeover of the board." David's voice, slow and measured, came through the receiver. "A hostile takeover, Brenda? What are you talking about? I just heard she's the CO. That's a bit different, isn't it?" There was a distinct lack of alarm in his tone that infuriated Brenda. "Different? David, she's suspended my authority. She's got auditors tearing through the books. This impacts all of us. Our reputation. Our control over this community." Brenda tried to inject urgency into her words, but it felt hollow even to her own ears. "Well, if she's the CO, Brenda, Maybe there's a reason for it, David drawled, clearly unconcerned. We've had a few issues lately, and some of those fines you pushed through, they seemed a little steep, even to me. Look, Brenda, I'm just saying, if Sterling Property Management thinks there's a problem, maybe there is. I'm not getting involved in any hostile takeover business. He hung up, leaving Brenda staring at her phone in disbelief. David, her dependable, malleable treasurer, had abandoned her. The walls were closing in, and she was alone. Back in the clubhouse, the auditors, Mark and Elena, worked with silent efficiency. By late afternoon, they had a preliminary report for Sarah. Miss Hayes, Mark began, placing a tablet on the table, its screen displaying a dense spreadsheet. We've cross-referenced Brenda Sterling's fine ledger with the bylaws. The good news is many of the older, legitimate fines were correctly issued and recorded. And the bad news? Sarah asked, anticipating the inevitable. Elena took over. The bad news is, over the last 2 years, particularly since Ms. Sterling became president, there's been a significant increase in what we're flagging as discretionary fines. These are for violations that are either vaguely defined, inconsistently applied, or appear to have been created retroactively without proper board approval. For instance, the harmonious visual flow clause she cited yesterday, it doesn't exist in the current bylaws. Sarah nodded. Mr. Henderson's roses. His fence. What about the financial side? Mark scrolled down the spreadsheet. That's where it gets interesting. While the fines were collected, a portion of the funds, roughly 15%, was diverted to a community beautification fund. On the surface, that sounds.
The small plastic duck, bobbing innocently in Sarah's skimmer, felt like a loaded weapon in Deborah's hand. Her fingers, usually so manicured and poised, trembled as they closed around the smooth red plastic. The laminated tag, with its simple, taunting message and the cheerful emoji, was not merely an accusation, it was an execution order for her carefully constructed facade. All the subtle torments, the freezing water, the oily film, the phantom sounds, the sickening hum, coalesced into this one undeniable piece of evidence. She wasn't imagining it. Sarah knew. Sarah had known all along. The dawning horror transformed into a cold, guttural rage. Deborah's world, built on control and the illusion of superiority, was crumbling. She looked around wildly, her eyes, darting from the gate to the unassuming birdhouse to the hibiscus bush, now seeing them not as garden fixtures, but as malevolent, watchful eyes. She dropped the duck as if it had burned her, watching it float back towards the skimmer, a silent, mocking witness. You little sneak, Deborah hissed, her voice low and venomous, directed at the empty air, at Sarah's unseen presence. You think you're so clever, don't you? She scrambled out of the yard, not bothering with her tool this time, yanking, opened the gate with a desperate force that made it rattle on its hinges. She didn't look back, but the image of that red duck, with its smiling, judgmental face, was seared into her mind. Back in the privacy of her own home, Deborah paced, a wild animal caught in a trap. Her pristine living room, usually a haven of order, now felt stifling. She imagined Sarah behind her windows watching her, laughing. The thought was unbearable. How long had Sarah known? How many times had she been observed? Every clandestine swim, every moment of perceived pleasure, was now tainted with the bitter taste of being watched, judged, and deliberately manipulated. She snatched up her phone, her fingers hovering over Sarah's contact. Her first instinct was to unleash a torrent of furious accusations, to demand an explanation, to threaten legal action. But then a chilling thought stopped her. If Sarah had cameras, if she had proof, then any accusation from Deborah would only serve to confirm her guilt. Sarah held all the cards. The realization was a bitter pill. Deborah had always been the one in control, the one who dictated terms, who subtly, or not so subtly, exerted her will over those she deemed lesser. To be so thoroughly outmaneuvered by the new girl was an unbearable humiliation. That evening, Deborah stayed locked inside, curtains drawn, her usual evening stroll abandoned. She felt exposed, vulnerable. Every rustle outside, every distant car door slamming was a potential witness. A neighbor who now knew her secret, thanks to Sarah's insidious gossip. Mrs. Henderson's sharp eyes at the pool party flashed in. Her mind, and Deborah knew, with a certainty that made her stomach churn, that Sarah had been poisoning the well. The next morning, the security feed from Sarah's house remained silent. No Deborah. Sarah felt a quiet sense of triumph, but also a new awareness. The game had shifted. Deborah was no longer just a trespasser. She was a wounded predator, and wounded predators were dangerous. Sarah spent the day reviewing all the footage. Hours of Deborah's illicit swims, her dismissive attitude, her increasingly paranoid behavior. The green dye, the oily film, the sonic emitter. It was all there, recorded. She carefully edited the most incriminating clips, creating a concise, undeniable montage. This was not for the police yet, but for something far more effective. The following afternoon, Sarah received an email. It wasn't from Deborah, but from the HOA. Subject: Request for meeting, neighborly conduct. Attached was a formal letter, copied to Deborah, requesting both parties attend a meeting to discuss recent concerns regarding property boundaries and community harmony. The letter, carefully worded, hinted at multiple complaints and allegations of inappropriate behavior. Sarah smiled. Mrs. Henderson was a woman of action. The grapevine had worked. The meeting was scheduled for Friday at the HOA community room. Sarah arrived punctually, dressed simply but impeccably. She carried a sleek, professional-looking tablet. Deborah, on the other hand, burst in late, her face flushed, her hair slightly disheveled. Her usual composed demeanor had cracked, revealing a raw, agitated woman beneath. Mrs. Henderson, flanked by two other stern-faced HOA board members, sat at the head of the polished oak table. She began with a formal opening, her tone clipped and serious. Thank you both for attending. We've received some concerning reports. Specifically, Ms. Vance, there have been allegations of unauthorized access to Ms. Miller's property, and Ms. Miller, we've received an email from you regarding alleged unsanitary pool conditions, which frankly raises questions about how Ms. Vance would have knowledge of such a thing. Deborah bristled. This is preposterous. I merely observed some chemical irregularities as a concerned neighbor. And as for unauthorized access, the Millers always welcomed me. It's a misunderstanding based on historical precedent. Her voice was shrill, lacking its usual persuasive cadence. Sarah waited, calmly, her tablet resting innocently on the table. Mrs. Henderson turned to Sarah. Ms. Miller, do you have anything to add regarding these claims? Sarah looked directly at Deborah, a quiet intensity in her eyes. Yes, Mrs. Henderson, I do. While I appreciate Ms. Vance's concern for my pool's sanitation, I'm afraid her observations are the direct result of her repeated unauthorized entries onto my property. She paused, letting the words sink in. I have proof, undeniable proof. Deborah's face paled. Proof? What proof? You're fabricating this, you manipulative little... I have video evidence, Ms. Vance, Sarah cut in, her voice clear and steady. Hours of it, from multiple angles, showing you bypassing my locked gate, entering my backyard, and using my pool. It includes your entry, your swims, and even your own verbal complaints about the water, which clearly indicate you were physically present. She picked up her tablet. I've compiled a short summary. Would you like to see it, Mrs. Henderson? I can play it for the board now. Deborah lunged across the table, her hand outstretched as if to snatch the tablet. "You wouldn't dare! That's an invasion of my privacy! It's illegal!" Her eyes were wide with panic. "On my property, Miss Vance," Sarah countered, her voice unwavering. "No, Miss Vance, it's not. It's security footage, and it shows you quite clearly violating my privacy and trespassing on my land, over and over again." Mrs. Henderson, horrified by Deborah's desperate lunge, intervened. "Miss Vance, please compose. Yourself. Ms. Miller, if you have this evidence, we would certainly like to see it." Deborah sank back into her chair, defeated, her eyes darting between Sarah and the tablet. The smug entitlement had vanished, replaced by stark terror. She knew with chilling certainty that her carefully cultivated image was about to be obliterated. This wasn't just about a pool anymore. It was about her reputation, her standing in the community, everything she valued. And Sarah, with her quiet strength and undeniable evidence, was about to dismantle it all.
Brenda Sterling stumbled backward, her carefully cultivated composure utterly shattered. The last vestiges of twilight deepened the shadows around her, making her appear small and diminished against the imposing backdrop of her own opulent home. The words, "Your reign of terror, irrevocably, spectacularly over," echoed in her mind, a death knell to her carefully constructed world of petty power. She clutched at the lapel of her silk blouse, as if physically warding off the truth. Sarah Hayes watched her for a moment longer, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, before turning and walking calmly back to her Sterling Industries car. The hum of its engine as she opened the door seemed to Brenda like a taunting purr of superior technology, a symbol of everything Sarah was and everything Brenda had just lost. As Sarah slid into the driver's seat, and the vehicle glided silently into the garage, Brenda felt a cold dread settle deep in her bones. This wasn't just a reprimand. This was an execution. Panic began to bubble, a frantic, desperate energy. Brenda fumbled for her phone, her fingers clumsy, and dialed the first number that came to mind. Carol Vance, the HOA vice president, her most loyal, albeit timid, ally. "Carol! Carol, you won't believe what just happened!" Brenda's voice was a frantic whisper, laced with a hysteria Carol had never heard before. "Brenda? What on earth? You sound like you've seen a ghost." Carol's voice, always a little reedy, crackled through the line. "Worse. Much, much worse. That new woman, Hayes, the one with the black car, she's the CEO of Sterling Property Management. She's been undercover. She just suspended everything. Everything, Carol. The audit starts tomorrow." A beat of stunned silence. Then, Carol's voice, even fainter. The CEO? But how? Why? She said there were complaints. Bullying. She's going to dismantle us, Carol. What are we going to do?" Brenda's plea was raw, desperate. "Complaints? But we always follow the rules, Brenda. Your rules," Carol whispered, a subtle emphasis on "your," that Brenda, in her panic, barely registered. I don't know, Brenda. This is huge. I need to process this." The lukewarm response from her supposed allies sent a fresh wave of despair through Brenda. Even Carol, her shadow, was deserting her. She hung up, a sense of crushing isolation descending. All those years spent meticulously building her empire of rules and regulations, the countless hours policing everything from mailbox heights to permitted shrubbery, the smug satisfaction of issuing fines and dictating taste, it all felt like ash in her mouth. The next morning arrived with an ominous, almost tangible weight. At precisely 9 a.m., a sleek, unmarked black sedan pulled into the Willow Creek Estates clubhouse parking lot. Two impeccably dressed individuals, carrying briefcases, emerged. Sarah Hayes met them at the entrance, her demeanor all business. "Good morning, Mark, Elena. Thank you for coming so promptly." "Of course, Miss Hayes." Mark, A man with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit responded. We're prepared for a full forensic audit. Where do you suggest we begin? Start with the financial records for the last 3 years, Sarah instructed, leading them into the clubhouse. Specifically, any discretionary funds, vendor contracts, and the complete ledger of all fines issued. Cross-reference that with resident complaints. I want to know who was fined, for what, and if the process adhered to the established bylaws, not Brenda Sterling's interpretations. As they settled into the small, rarely used office at the back of the clubhouse, Brenda Sterling appeared, her face pale, eyes puffy, but with a surprising resurgence of defiance. She carried a stack of binders, thick with documents, and slammed them onto the table. These are all the records, Miss Hayes, Brenda said, her voice strained but steady. Every invoice, every fine, every board meeting minute. I assure you, everything is in order. You'll find no irregularities. She tried to meet Sarah's gaze, but her eyes flickered away, betraying her bravado. Sarah merely nodded, her expression unreadable. Thank you, Brenda. Mark and Elena will be reviewing these. They'll have questions, and I expect you to answer them truthfully and thoroughly. Your cooperation will be noted. She paused, then added, for the duration of the audit, you are to refrain from any HOA activities. No emails, no directives, no resident contact on behalf of the board. Is that understood? Brenda bristled. You're stripping me of my duties? This is an outrage. I was elected. Consider it a temporary leave of absence, Brenda, pending the outcome of the investigation. Sarah corrected, her voice firm. This isn't punitive yet. It's procedural. We need to ensure the integrity of the process. If you have any questions, you can direct them to me. But do not interfere. Defeated, Brenda could only